My world exists between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. It's a cleaner, sharper world, pared down to the glow of a laptop screen and the silent logic of code. In the rural, middle-of-nowhere town I call home, this nocturnal life is only possible because of one place, the quick check off the old state highway. A 25-minute shot if I'm speeding, which I am, always making it the closest thing to a neighbor I have. A beacon of fluorescent light and processed food in a sea of farmland and darkness. I'm a creature of ritual. When the coding hunger hits, a switch flips from comfortable to ravenous in seconds, and the pilgrimage begins. The highway is more of a forgotten local road, a strip of cracked asphalt that sees more deer than headlights after sunset. I've made the drive 100 times, lulled by the rhythmic dash of yellow lane divider stripes. The quick check clerks, a rotating cast of the weary and the wary, probably know me as the late-night guy who buys a chicken salad sandwich and paces the aisles, too wired on caffeine and my own ADHD to stand still. I never thought I was memorable. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday, the days blur. I was in the flow, that sacred zone where time dissolves. By 2 a.m., my stomach's rebellion couldn't be ignored. I shut the laptop, embraced the inevitable, and stepped out into the velvet, insect-chirping night. The drive was uneventful, a tunnel through nothing. The quick check sign hummed a welcome. Inside, the air was its usual blend of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. I ordered my sandwich from a clerk named Earl, whose face was a roadmap of cigarette breaks and graveyard shifts, and began my restless patrol of the snack aisles. That's when I saw the pilgrim. At the very back of the store, facing a humming refrigerator unit crammed with lunch meat and gallons of milk, a man sat cross-legged on the scuffed linoleum floor. He was just sitting, facing the appliance as if it were a fireplace or an oracle. A brown coat, faded jeans. The scene was so profoundly wrong it bypassed my conscious thought initially. My brain filed it under shelf display and moved on. A half-second later, it screeched to a halt. What? I did a full, unsubtle double take. He was still there. A statue of a man. A toxic brew of curiosity and social anxiety stirred in me. I needed to see his face, to contextualize the absurdity. I ambled down a parallel aisle, planning a casual, sweeping glance as I turned the corner, just a bored shopper, not a gawker. I was a terrible actor. The moment I pivoted into his aisle, his head spun toward me. Not turned. Snapped. It was a violent, mechanical jerk, utterly devoid of human grace. My breath lodged in my throat. His face was a monument to something broken. His eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with a terrifying vacancy, like windows to a room where the lights were on but no one was home. His bottom lip trembled with a frantic, independent energy, a live wire of twitching muscle. He wasn't relaxed, he was coiled, his posture a tangle of unnatural angles, as if every tendon was strained against an invisible force. But the worst was his gaze. It wasn't anger, fear, or curiosity. It was a void. A flat, dead stare that seemed to leach the warmth from the fluorescent air around us. We were locked in that silent, horrifying communion for an eternity, probably 3 seconds before I ripped my eyes away, pretending a sudden, deep fascination with the rack of beef jerky. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. I retreated to the counter, positioning myself to watch the corner, my skin crawling with the expectation of the brown coat emerging from the maze of snacks. "Order for David," Earl called. I hadn't given my name. He'd remembered it. The recognition felt like a spotlight. I grabbed the bag and was out the door, the electronic chime sounding like a salvation bell. As I swung my sedan onto the empty highway, movement flickered in my periphery. I glanced back. A figure in a brown coat was sprinting across the parking lot, not toward the road, but away from it, toward the far shadows where the light didn't reach. He moved with a terrifying, single-minded velocity. Headlights flared. An old, boxy, 80s model Chevrolet pickup, painted a nondescript, primer gray. It roared to life. He flung himself inside. The tires squealed as it shot out of the lot, not following me, but disappearing behind the building. A cold stone settled in my gut. What kind of errand demands that kind of desperation at 2 a.m.? I pushed the thought down, clinging to the relief of distance. The comforting darkness of the countryside swallowed me. I was alone again. Then, a pinprick of light bloomed in my rear view. It grew, fast. Too fast. My first, naive thought, police. I eased off the accelerator. But no siren wailed, no roof lights flashed. As the vehicle closed the final gap, the high beam searing my mirrors, the silhouette became unmistakable. The boxy grille. The rusted flares. The truck. Ice water flooded my veins. It was him. He must have circled around. I stomped the gas. My sedan lurched forward. The response from behind was immediate, furious, rhythmic flashing of high beams and a horn that blared not as a warning, but a scream of pure, distilled rage. True terror isn't fear, it's a cold, metallic certainty in your bones. Death was no longer an abstract concept, it was a specific, speeding shape of steel and glass. I pushed to 90, then 100. The voice in my head shrieked that the next bend would send me into the trees. I swerved right, hoping he'd pass. He mirrored me, staying glued to my bumper, a predatory shadow. Thinking of the empty shoulder ahead, I began to slow, my turn signal blinking a meek, pathetic surrender. He interpreted it as weakness. The impact was a thunderclap of shearing metal. My head snapped forward, the seat belt a cruel savior. The wheel jerked like a live thing in my hands. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was an execution. The world narrowed to the violent present. I saw his grille fill my mirror again, angling for the final, fatal shunt. And in that crystalline moment of panic, an insane plan surfaced from the primal sludge of my hindbrain. I waited, muscles singing with tension, until the last possible second. As the truck surged forward for the kill, I yanked the wheel hard left and slammed the brakes. My car shuddered, tires screeching in protest. The truck, committed to its murderous momentum, rocketed past me. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the wide, dead eyes in the driver's side window, now wide with something else: surprise, maybe even frustration. He overcorrected, swerving violently once, twice, before the laws of physics took over. The truck pirouetted across the empty lanes, shot over the shoulder, and vanished into the ink-black field with a crash of rending grass and metal. I didn't wait. Trembling so violently I could barely steer, I floored it. The rest of the drive home was a blur of adrenaline and shadow. The deputy who took my statement the next morning had the weary air of a man who'd heard it all. He scribbled in his notebook, asked if I'd been drinking, and nodded slowly at my description of the dead eyes. "We'll check the cameras at the quick check," he said, without conviction. "In the meantime, try to put it behind you. Probably just a meth head having a real bad night." The dismissal was a second violation. I knew what I'd seen. That wasn't tweaker frenzy. It was something colder, more vacant. The silence from the sheriff's department stretched, becoming a physical presence in my small, cluttered house. A week bled into 2. The only update was a voicemail. Cameras were inconclusive. Vehicle is common. Case is active but pending further leads. The message was clear: go on with your life. But I couldn't. The terror had metabolized into a consuming, obsessive curiosity. Why? The question was a splinter in my mind. My work suffered. My nocturnal focus was shattered, replaced by jumpiness and long, unproductive sessions scouring local news and, eventually, the darker corners of the internet. On a forum dedicated to missing persons in the region, I found it. A buried comment from a user named Static Echo, * my cousin drives rigs. Says he's seen sleepers at all-night stops. Just sitting, vacant. At the quick check-off mile marker 117, one followed a kid in a sedan out. Never saw the sedan again. * Mile marker 117. My quick check. My sedan. It was the crack in the dam. Static Echo led me to his cousin, Donnie, a mountain of a trucker with a red beard and eyes older than his years. We met in a neon-lit diner 40 miles away. Over a slice of cherry pie I bought him, he laid out a map of quiet horror. Seen 3, maybe 4 of them in the past half year, he grunted, voice like gravel. Always at 24-hour places near back highways. Always alone. Just, blank. Staring at nothing. Then something clicks. Usually when a young, solo person shows up. They follow. He fixed me with his weary blue gaze. You fit the bill. You're lucky to be breathin'. What are they? I whispered. Don't know what. Junkies on some new zombie cut? Victims of some screwed up hypnosis gig for car theft? All I know is they're out there. They're pointed. And you, he pointed a thick finger at me, your car is marked. The mission might not be over. His words became my new reality. Marked. I borrowed money, sold my wounded sedan for scrap, and bought a beige, anonymous hatchback. I changed my routes. I slept with a kitchen knife on my nightstand. But I didn't stop looking. The obsession had its own gravity. I posed as an insurance adjuster and, through staggering luck and corporate indifference, obtained a single grainy security still from the quick check that night. The timestamp was 1:47 a.m. It showed my sedan pulling in. And there, parked in the dark corner of the lot, already waiting, was the boxy pickup truck. He wasn't following me to the store. He was already there. My arrival was the trigger. The confirmation was a cold fist around my heart. This was deliberate. Targeted. The digital trail went cold. Static Echo vanished. Donnie stopped answering texts. The silence was a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum, it fills it with fear. Then, the probe. A call to my new, unlisted number, placed to the hatchback's Bluetooth. No voice. Just the sound of slow, rhythmic breathing and, faint but unmistakable in the background, the high-pitched hum of fluorescent lights. It lasted 15 seconds. The hum of the quick check. They knew the car was gone. They were checking for the driver. I went back to the sheriff, armed with my log, my map, the photo. The young deputy at the front desk listened with polite detachment before sliding it all back to me. Sir, this is fixation. It's not healthy. It's not evidence. Get a security system. Be aware. Let us do our job. I was alone. Officially, a nuisance. Privately, a marked man. The final act began last night. I was trying to work, to reclaim some shred of my old rhythm, when the motion sensor light on my back porch flicked on. I froze, my cursor blinking on the screen. Peering through the blinds, I saw nothing. Just the empty yard, the tarp-covered skeleton of my old sedan. An hour later, a rock, small and sharp, sailed through my living room window with a sickening crash. Not a random throw. A precise shot. It lay on my rug, and wrapped around it with a rubber band was a note, printed on thermal paper like a receipt. 2 words, "Stop looking." It wasn't from the police. It was a receipt paper. The kind used by gas stations and convenience stores. They weren't just out on the highway. They knew where I lived. The mission was indeed still active, and I had just been promoted from a target to a problem. I didn't call the sheriff this time. What would I say? The man with the dead eyes left me a note. I boarded up the window, my hands shaking not with fear now, but with a cold, clarifying fury. The terror had burned away, leaving behind a brittle, dangerous resolve. They want me to stop looking. They want me to hide, to wait, to be a good, scared victim until they decide to finish what the pickup truck started. But I've seen the void in those eyes. I've mapped their patterns. I know their hunting grounds. The clerk, Earl, might remember more. The security hard drive the cops took might have other faces, other vehicles. Donnie knew more than he told me. The passive night is over. The man who just wanted to code in peace is gone, replaced by someone else. I am no longer prey waiting for the predator to return. Tonight, as I sit in the dark of my living room, the knife on the table and the boarded-up window a testament to the new rules, I make a decision. I will not wait for the next ring, the next rock, the next set of headlights in my drive. I will become the question they have to answer. The anomaly in their program. Tomorrow, I go back to the quick check. Not at 2 a.m. At 4 p.m., in the bland safety of daylight. I will talk to Earl. I will look for patterns he hasn't mentioned. I will find the other threads. They think they've marked me. They have no idea they've awakened something. The quiet coder is gone. In his place is a man who has stared into the dead-eyed void, and who is no longer willing to simply look away. The hunt is on. But the roles are no longer clear. And in the fluorescent glow of the all-night store, under the same hum that echoed in that phone call, I will begin to turn the tables. The sleeper thinks his mission is unfinished. So is mine. This happened in the summer of 2022. I was 25 and working what I guess you'd call an unusual logistics job, a last-mile phantom for a startup that thought it could out-Amazon Amazon in the weird, forgotten rural markets of the Southwest. My cargo was fragile, expensive dreams, refurbished servers, custom liquid-cooled gaming rigs, boutique audio equipment headed to miners, streamers, and survivalists in places the big carriers wouldn't touch. The pay was decent, the solitude was a given, and the routes were beautifully, brutally erratic. 12-hour stretches were standard. The road was my office. My vehicle wasn't a company van. It was a modified, unmarked Ford Transit, matte gray, with a suspension tuned for weight and stealth. The only identifier was a small, magnetic decal-eyed slap on the door during deliveries, Valkyrie Logistics. I'd peel it off as soon as the drop was made. It felt less like a delivery job and more like running covered ops. The night it happened, I was deep in the final leg of a Phoenix to Lovington run, a load of high-end GPU cards destined for a crypto mining operation that probably ran on stolen electricity. It was 1:18 a.m., according to the dashboard clock. I was winding through the desolate, serpentine stretch of Route 82, skirting the dark, brooding mass of the Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never been there, it's not just empty. It's consumingly empty. The night sky is a vast, star-choked void that seems to press down on you. The road is a narrow, pitted ribbon of asphalt, its yellow lines faded to ghost marks. Your headlights carve a solitary tunnel through a landscape of scrub brush and skeletal juniper trees. You might not see another soul for an hour. The silence is so profound you can hear the ping of your engine cooling down when you stop. But Route 82 is a choke point. The only viable artery for 50 miles in any direction. The GPS alternatives are cartographic jokes, adding hours through places with names like Carrizo or Hope, which, ironically, has none. If you need to move through the slice of the state, you take the 82. Everyone knows it. I was listening to a true crime podcast about the I-40 serial killings, the host's calm voice dissecting horror, which in hindsight was a morbid sort of foreshadowing. As I rounded along, blind bend the kind where the road seems to disappear into the earth, my headlights washed over a vehicle on the gravel shoulder. A red Hyundai Elantra hatchback, maybe 5 years old. It was parked at a jagged angle, its front tire half on the asphalt, half off, like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Its hazard lights pulsed a frantic, red-yellow heartbeat in the vast dark. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas. Protocol, and common city sense, screamed at me, "Keep driving. Call it in. Not your problem." Then my beams caught her. A woman stood beside the driver's door, one hand braced on the roof for balance. She was waving her phone in a slow, desperate arc above her head, the screen glowing like a tiny, futile star. She was young, maybe my age, dressed in jeans and a dark hoodie despite the summer warmth. Her face, illuminated in strobes by my headlights, was pale, etched with a strain that looked beyond simple car trouble. My mind split. One part, the professional, coldly assessed, a classic setup. The other part, the human, thought of my kid sister, of my girlfriend back in Phoenix. What if it was real? What if the next person who came along wasn't someone with a Glock 43 holstered discreetly under the steering column? The gun was my secret. The company's insurance would have had a coronary, but when you're delivering $10,000 of hardware to a locked compound with a trespassers will be shot sign, you make your own rules. It was my shadow passenger. I slowed to a crawl, pulling up about 20 feet past her car. I hit the button to roll down the passenger window just 2 inches, enough to talk, not enough for a hand to snake through. The desert air, cool and smelling of dust and sage, seeped in. Before I could speak, she was at my window. She didn't knock. She just pressed her face close to the gap. Her eyes were wide, the pupils swallowing the hazel irises in the low light. "Please," she said, her voice a dry, jittery rasp. "My car just died. Phone's dead. I need a ride. Just to the next gas station. Please." She tried the door handle. It was, of course, locked. The story was wrong. A dead car doesn't give you power for hazard lights. A dead phone doesn't glow in your hand. The jitter in her voice wasn't just panic, it had a chemical edge to it, a wired, amphetamine buzz. "What happened to the car?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. "I don't know, it just stopped." "Please, Just drive. There's a station in Artesia, I think. Just go. She was already looking past me, down the dark road ahead, as if expecting someone. The deflection was blatant. Every alarm bell in my nervous system was clanging. I was about to say I'll call a tow for you and pull away when my eyes flicked to the side mirror, then to the rear view. In the red pulse of her hazards, I saw a shadow detach itself from behind her Hyundai. A man. Tall, lanky, wearing a dark jacket. He'd been crouched, hiding by the rear bumper. He stood up slowly, methodically, like a ghoul uncurling from a grave. My blood turned to slush. I snapped my head forward just in time to see a second figure step out from the scrub brush directly into the center of my lane, 50 feet ahead. He held something long and metallic, resting on his shoulder, a tire iron, a pipe, maybe a crowbar. He didn't wave his arms. He just stood there, a silent, solid barrier. It was a pincer move. Flawless in its simplicity. They'd done this before. Oh God, the woman in my ear whispered, but it wasn't a sound of fear. It was a cue. Time didn't slow down. It crystallized. Every detail became hyper-sharp, the grit on my windshield, the hum of my idling engine, the acrid smell of the woman's sweat-soaked hoodie. My survival instinct wasn't a thought, it was a physical command that bypassed my brain and went straight to my limbs. I didn't swerve around the man in front of me. In a van this size, on a road this narrow, he could easily sidestep and swing for my windshield or tires. I went through him. I slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The Transit's turbo diesel engine roared with a fury that shattered the desert silence. The man in the road had maybe 2 seconds of frozen surprise before the reality of 3 tons of steel bearing down on him registered. He dove, a frantic, graceless leap into the ditch. I felt a soft, sickening thump as my right side mirror clipped something, his leg, his arm, I'll never know, and disintegrated in a shower of plastic. No. You idiot. Stop, the woman shrieked, but her voice was already morphing from panicked victim to furious accomplice. She wasn't looking at me. She was whipping around in her seat, staring back at the receding figures of her partners. Then she moved. It wasn't a fumble. It was a practiced, sharp motion. She ducked her head and yanked her large canvas purse into her lap, her hands digging frantically inside. I knew what was in there. It wasn't mace. In one fluid motion, I took my right hand off the wheel, reached under the column, and drew the Glock. I didn't point it at her. I laid it flat on the top of the steering wheel, the black polymer stark under the dashboard lights, my finger indexed along the frame. The next thing that comes out of that bag, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, is the last thing you'll ever do. Put your hands on the dashboard. Now. She froze. Her head turned slowly. She saw the gun. She saw my eyes in the greenish glow of the instruments. Whatever she saw there, not panic, not anger, but a cold, absolute readiness to follow through, drained the remaining color from her face. Her hands, empty, slowly rose and flattened against the dashboard. The fight leaked out of her, replaced by a hollow, vacant stillness. She didn't speak another word. For the next 27 minutes, she just stared ahead, breathing shallowly, a marionette with its strings cut. The only sound was the drone of the engine and the frantic hammering of my own heart. The lights of Artesia eventually appeared on the horizon, a smear of civilization in the dark. I bypassed the first truck stop, too open, too many shadows. I found a smaller, well-lit station with 2 18-wheelers parked side by side, their drivers likely sleeping in the cabs. It was as good as it was going to get. I pulled in, keeping the van pointed toward the road for a quick exit. "Get out," I said. She didn't move. I can't. "My friends, they'll." "Your friends are back on the 82 with a busted plan," I snarled. Leaning across her, ignoring her flinch, I yanked the door handle and shoved the door open. "Out. Now." She half fell, half scrambled out, stumbling on the pavement and landing hard on her hands and knees. As soon as she cleared the frame, I leaned over, grabbed the door, and slammed it shut. That's when the yelling started. Not at me, but into the night, a raw, guttural scream of fury and failure. "He took the phone. He has the phone." One of the truck cab doors flew open. A burly man in a sleeveless shirt hopped down, his face etched with concern and confusion. All he saw was a van, a woman on the ground screaming, and me behind the wheel. I didn't wait for the interrogation. I gunned the engine. As I peeled out of the lot, I yelled through the open window at the trucker, "She's not stranded. She's dangerous. Call the cops." Then I was gone, melting back into the dark grid of service roads, my mirrors empty. 10 miles down the road, at a lonely, brightly lit station outside of Lovington, I finally stopped to fuel up. My hands were steady, a function of pure adrenaline backlash. The van felt contaminated. After filling the tank, I opened the passenger door. The scent of her sweat, cheap perfume, and fear lingered. I checked the footwell. Nothing. I ran my hands between the seat and the center console. My fingers brushed against hard, rectangular plastic. I pulled out a cheap, prepaid burner phone. The back was off. The battery was missing. And tucked beside it, still sealed in its retail plastic, was a pack of heavy-duty, industrial zip ties. My stomach rolled. The image was instant and visceral, wrists bound to the steering wheel, ankles tied together, a helpless piece of cargo in my own vehicle. They weren't just after the van or its contents. They were after control. For what? I didn't want to imagine. Human trafficking? A ransom play? Forced participation in something worse? I walked to the station's dumpster, tossed in the phone shell and the zip ties, and hurled in the matching battery I found under the seat for good measure. They disappeared into the garbage with a final, satisfying thud. I never reported it. Not to the police in Artesia or Lovington, and definitely not to Valkyrie Logistics. Explaining the gun would have meant instant termination and potential charges. Explaining why I'd driven off with a woman and then ejected her would have been a legal quagmire. The trucker was a witness, but to what? It was my word against a scene that looked profoundly guilty. I finished the delivery 2 hours later, my smile to the crypto miner's security guard as professional and empty as ever. I drove back to Phoenix as the sun rose, the events on Route 82 feeling like a fever dream etched into my retinas. But the story doesn't end with the dumpster. A week later, avoiding the 82, I was taking a long way back through Arizona. At a dusty rest stop near the border, I picked up a local newspaper someone had left behind. A small, back-page article from the Eddy County Sentinel was circled in smudged red pen. Body found in Lincoln National Forest. The brief report stated that hikers had discovered the remains of a young male, approximately 25 to 30 years old, in a remote area off Route 82. The cause of death was under investigation, but the body showed signs of prolonged physical restraint. Notably, the victim's wrists and ankles bore ligature marks consistent with plastic fasteners. The article ended with a plea for information regarding a red Hyundai Elantra reportedly seen in the area weeks prior. The red pen circle bled into the newsprint. Someone had left this for me. Someone who knew my route, my vehicle. The trucker? One of the men from the road? Or her? The zip ties in my van hadn't been a future threat. They'd been a signature. A calling card from a previous job. And I had driven away with a key piece of evidence and a witness who could place their failed accomplice in my van. The gun had saved my life that night. But the silence I'd chosen, the evidence I'd discarded, had painted a target on my back bigger than any Valkyrie Logistics decal. They weren't just highway predators. They were connected, organized, and they'd left a man in the forest to die. They knew I could link them to it. Now, every time I see a red hatchback in my mirrors, or a lone figure on a deserted stretch of road, I don't just feel fear. I feel a cold, sickening certainty. The delivery on Route 82 wasn't a failed ambush. It was the first contact. A receipt had been printed, and the transaction was still pending. The 82nd mile isn't behind me. It's a road I'm still on, and the next shoulder I pull over to might be the one they've chosen for my final delivery. My husband Mark and I were map dreamers. When we decided to move from Utah to Georgia for his job, we didn't see a logistical chore, we saw a canvas. We plotted a route that looked less like a line and more like a spastic heartbeat on the atlas, veering into national monuments, bypassing interstates for blue highways, and committing us to the true, often lonely, backbone of America. The price for this poetry was miles of profound nothingness. The apotheosis of which was western Kansas on US Route 400. It's a place that defies metaphor. It's not empty like a desert, which feels sculpted and ancient. This is a geometric emptiness. The land is a perfect plain, shaved and partitioned into colossal squares of soy and corn, stretching to a horizon so flat and far it seems to curve the other way. The sky isn't a sky, it's a dome, a vast, oppressive lid clamped over the world. Driving through it at dusk feels less like travel and more like being slowly digested by space itself. I'd surrendered to it, falling into a heavy sleep as the last orange bled from the sky. I woke not to a sound, but to a change in vibration, the smooth highway hum replaced by the gritty crunch of gravel. The dashboard clock glowed 10:07 p.m. We had parked at a place that seemed less built and more shed, like a single tooth left in a gum. A gas and go, the N flickering erratically in its neon script. One pump, aged and yellowed. A low, cinder block building with windows so dark they looked painted black, save for one glowing rectangle near the door. Beyond the island of weak light, the Kansas night was absolute. Just grabbing snacks and gas, Mark said, rubbing his eyes. Last chance for a while. Feel like we're the last people on Earth. I'm using the bathroom, I said, already unbuckling. The thought of a cleanish, non-moving toilet was suddenly paramount. In my haste, I left my purse, my phone, my tether to the world, on the passenger seat. It was a 30-foot walk. What could happen? The air inside was thick and still, warm with the smell of stale fried food, old coffee grounds, and the faint, sweet chemical scent of coolant. An older man with a face like a dried riverbed sat behind the counter, his eyes not leaving the racing form spread before him. He didn't acknowledge me. The only sound was the low drone of a cooler motor. A narrow hallway led to the back, lit by a single, buzzing bulb. The women's room door was heavy, warped wood. I pushed it open. And collided with a nightmare stepping out of a stall. The first sense was smell, a pungent blend of unwashed body, mothballs, and something sour, like spoiled milk. Then, the sight. A woman, perhaps in her 60s but aged by hardship, with a wild mane of gray hair. It wasn't just messy, it was congregated, matted into dense, sticky-looking clumps as if coated in syrup or tar. On her feet were cheap foam flip-flops, once blue, now grime gray, that made a soft, moist slap against the linoleum. But it was the coat that held my gaze, a thing of jaw-dropping wrongness. A puffy, knee-length parka in a violent clash of purple and green, like a deep bruise over rotting lettuce. It was zipped tightly to her throat, the synthetic material rustling loudly with her every tiny movement. The heat in the cramped room was already stifling. Wearing that coat was an act of either madness or profound necessity. She clutched a white plastic grocery bag, its handles knotted into a frantic, complex lump. When her eyes met mine, she didn't startle, didn't apologize, didn't look away. She simply stopped and stared. Her eyes were a flat, dark brown, but they held no light, no curiosity, no embarrassment. They were voids. And they were fixed on me with an intensity that felt prescriptive. It was the stare of a bored customer waiting for a clerk to finish a transaction, or a scientist observing a lab animal. She was waiting for me to perform a specific, expected action. A cold filament of unease threaded down my spine. I managed a tight, closed-lipped smile and a nod, attempting to sidestep her. She didn't move to block me, but she didn't yield either, forcing me to brush awkwardly past her, my shoulder momentarily pressing against the puffy, rustling coat. I caught another wave of that sour mothball smell. I hurried into the nearest stall, locking the flimsy metal bolt with a click that sounded impossibly loud. I sat down, not because I needed to, but because I needed the barrier. My heart was thumping a quick, anxious rhythm. Just a weird local. A homeless person. Someone's confused grandmother. I repeated the mantras, but they crumbled against the memory of that expectant, empty stare. I waited, listening. I heard the slap of her flip-flops. They didn't move toward the sinks. They moved toward the door. The hinge gave a long, theatrical squeak. The door thudded shut. A wave of pure relief washed over me. I slumped, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The silence of the empty bathroom was beautiful. Then I heard the breathing. It wasn't mine. Mine was shallow, rapid. This was slow, deep, and rhythmic. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. It was coming from just outside my stall, in the corner by the door. She hadn't left. She'd opened the door, slammed it shut to mimic an exit, and remained inside, standing silently in the shadows. A silent, breathing statue, waiting. Pure, animal fear, cold and slick, flooded my veins. I pressed my hand over my own mouth, terrified the sound of my panic would betray me. Why? What did she want? My money was in the car. My phone was in the car. I was trapped in a 5x5-foot metal box, and a predator was waiting just outside. The silence stretched, punctuated only by that maddeningly steady breath. I thought of screaming. Would Mark hear me through the walls, over the hum of the cooler? Would the cashier care? The image of her glaring face, the sharp object in her hand my mind had already conjured, kept me silent. An eternity later, maybe 3 minutes, the door squeaked and thudded again. The breathing stopped. This time, the relief was cautious, tempered by a dawning horror at the game being played. I waited, counting to 60 in my head. The bathroom was silent. I slowly, silently, reached for the lock on the stall door. Whoosh. A massive, ragged gasp, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath until their lungs burned, ripped through the quiet. It was immediately followed by the squeak thud of the door a third time. My blood didn't run cold, it froze solid. This wasn't just menace. This was theater. She was performing a loop, a scripted piece of psychological torture designed to frame my nerves to breaking point. The gasp was a reveal, a taunt. See? I was here all along. And I'm still playing. The suspense was now a physical weight, crushing my chest. I could no longer stand the not knowing. Fear had peaked into a desperate need for resolution, even if that resolution was confrontation. With a trembling hand, I slid the bolt back. The sound was a gunshot in the silence. I pushed the stall door open, my body tensed for impact. The bathroom was empty. The sinks, the mirror, the paper towel dispenser all normal, all innocently still. The only evidence was the lingering ghost of her smell. I moved to the sink, my eyes locked on the mirror, expecting to see her reflection appear behind me. I turned the faucet, the water shockingly loud, and scrubbed my hands in a frenzied, symbolic act of cleansing. I didn't dry them. I inched to the door, listening. Nothing. I yanked it open and burst into the hallway, half sprinting back to the store's main room. The cashier hadn't moved. A large man in a trucker's cap was now at the counter, buying a pack of cigarettes and a lottery ticket. His presence was a tangible comfort. I positioned myself by a rack of dusty air fresheners, using his bulk as a shield between me and the hallway mouth. I waited, pretending to examine a pine forest scent until he completed his transaction and turned toward the exit. I moved with him, a step behind, a shadow in his wake. As he pushed the glass door open, I slipped out right after him, the night air hitting my damp hands. And she was there. Not in the hallway. Not hiding. She was standing 10 feet to the left of the door, just outside the cone of light from the store, merged with the deep shadow of the building's wall. The ambient glow from the sign caught the sickly purple and green of her coat, making it seem to pulse faintly. She was staring directly at me. The vacant expectation was gone, replaced by a glare of pure, unadulterated malice. Her lips were peeled back from yellowed teeth in a silent snarl. And in her right hand, held low against her thigh, was a long, dark metallic object. In the poor light, it could have been a large wrench, a tire iron, a knife. Its precise nature didn't matter, its intent was screamingly clear. Her body was coiled, knees slightly bent, the flip-flops planted in a fighter's stance. She wasn't just waiting now. She was poised. The trucker, oblivious, ambled toward his rig. I was exposed, halfway between the safety of the store and the sanctuary of my car. Our eyes held. In that suspended second, I understood this was the climax of her performance. The bathroom was the first act, the unnerving preamble. This was the demand. Then, as suddenly as she had crystallized into threat, she broke. Without a sound, without a backward glance, she spun on her heel and shuffled rapidly around the back corner of the cinderblock building, disappearing into the profound blackness that swallowed the rear of the property. The release of tension was so violent it made me dizzy. I ran, my wet hand slipping on the car door handle. I tumbled inside, slamming and locking the door. What took so long? You okay? You're white as a sheet, Mark said, his voice laced with sleepy concern. Just drive. Please. Now. Don't ask, just go. To his credit, he didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, gravel spitting. As we turned onto the blacktop, I craned my neck, looking back at the fading island of light. She had re-emerged. She stood at the very corner where she'd vanished, a stark, rigid silhouette against the cinder block. Not running, not waving. Just watching. A sentinel marking our passage, a dark waypoint in the endless flat. Her head was tilted, as if cataloging our make, model, and direction. I told Mark everything on the next long, dark stretch, my voice trembling. He was rational, concerned, slightly angry at my lack of phone. Probably just mentally ill, sweetheart. Off her meds. The world's full of sad, broken people. He meant to comfort me. But his explanation felt hollow, a band-aid on a wound that felt psychic. Mentally ill people don't perform complex, psychological ambushes. They don't hold their breath in perfect silence. They don't coordinate their glare with the shadow of a building. We tried to forget. We finished our move, built a new life in Georgia. But the encounter was a seed. It didn't fade, it germinated in the dark soil of my subconscious, sending out tendrils that changed my behavior. I haven't used a roadside restroom since. I plan trips around major truck stops with bustling food courts. I carry my phone everywhere, even to a hotel room's ice machine. I see a certain shade of purple-green and my breath hitches. And sometimes, in the quiet of my new Georgia home, far from the Kansas flats, I wake up thinking I hear it, the soft, moist slap-slap of foam on linoleum, getting closer, then stopping just outside my door. Waiting. Breathing. Performing the first act of a play whose finale I narrowly, and perhaps only temporarily, escaped. My name is Jake Ellis, and in the winter of 2020, I was a ghost in a Ford F-150, haunting the interstates of the Midwest. My job was delivering auto parts, a carburetor to a garage in Peoria, a transmission to a dealer in Fort Wayne, a crate of sensors to a fleet yard outside Joliet. It was a paycheck built on solitude, caffeine, and the hypnotic thrum of tires on expansion joints. My world was the cab, the scent of stale coffee, the drone of AM talk radio debating politics I didn't care about, and the vast, indifferent landscapes scrolling past my windows. I was a non-entity, a delivery vector. I liked it that way. It's also why I'm here, 3 years later, my hands still occasionally trembling on a steering wheel, telling you why you should never, under any circumstances, stop at a highway rest area after dark. The night it happened was a textbook Midwestern January special. The cold wasn't just air, it was a solid, invasive force. It seeped through the floorboards, climbed up the pedals, and gnawed at your bones no matter how high you blasted the pathetic factory heater. I was eastbound on I-80, a stretch of concrete so mind-numbingly straight and featureless it feels like you're driving on a treadmill. The destination was a 24-hour mechanics shop in Davenport. The cargo, a high-pressure fuel pump for a diesel rig, a small, expensive box bolted securely in the bed. Drowsiness is a silent hijacker. 1 minute you're fine, singing along to some classic rock relic, the next, your eyelids are made of lead, the lane lines are blurring into a single, hypnotic stream, and your head is doing that slow, dangerous dip. It hit me like a chemical switch around mile marker 147. I fought it, slapping my own face, cranking the radio to a painful volume. But the pull was gravitational. The next blue sign, promising a rest area in 2 miles, felt like a divine pardon. I took the exit ramp, my tires crunching on salt-brimmed asphalt. The place was less a rest stop and more a concrete afterthought dumped in a frozen field. A few sodium vapor lights cast pools of jaundiced, buzzing light that seemed to make the surrounding darkness thicker. A low, brown brick building housed the bathrooms. The parking lot was a vast, empty plain of asphalt, glittering with a thin skin of frost. And in the farthest corner, swallowed by the gloom, was a white van. It was an old Chevy G20, the boxy, anonymous kind from the 90s. No windows on the sides or rear. No business logos. It was just white. A blank page. It was parked nose out, perfectly still. No lights, no exhaust plume in the brittle air. It looked abandoned, or asleep. Instinct, that low-grade hum you learn to trust on the road, suggested I park as far from it as possible. I instead pulled directly under the brightest light standard, maybe 30 yards from the building's door. A show of forced normality. See. I have nothing to hide. I belong here. The men's room was an icebox. A wall-mounted heater clanked and rattled, issuing a metallic death rattle but producing no discernible warmth. I splashed frigid water on my face, the shock briefly scattering the fatigue. I avoided my own eyes in the speckled mirror. In that silence, the emptiness of the place pressed in. I was suddenly, acutely aware of my own breathing. I hurried out, zipping my coat to my chin. Stepping back into the amber light, I glanced automatically toward the van. Its headlights were on. High beams. Two brilliant, blinding orbs cutting through the darkness, aimed directly at the path between the building and my truck. My breath caught. The engine was silent. I'd heard no cough of a starter, no rumble of ignition. The lights had just manifested. Every primitive alarm in my nervous system began shrieking. This was theater. A statement. We see you. I didn't run. Running triggers chase instincts. I walked, deliberately, to my truck, unlocked it, and climbed in. My movements were calm, but inside, my heart was a frantic bird in a cage. I started the engine, the sound obscenely loud. I put it in drive and began a slow, wide turn toward the exit lane. As my headlights swept across the front of the white van, its light snapped off. Click. Instant, total darkness. 1 second, 2 blinding eyes, the next, a void. It was so abrupt, so clean, it felt electronic. Robotic. My foot jerked, and the truck lurched. I steadied it, my eyes glued to the rear view as I accelerated up the ramp and merged back onto the interstate. For 5 minutes, I tried to breathe. Just a coincidence. Someone waking up, checking their lights, going back to sleep. You're being paranoid? The rationalizations were thin, brittle things. They shattered completely when I saw the twin pinpricks in my rear-view mirror. They appeared out of the nothingness behind me, 2 steady stars that grew with terrifying patience. They didn't race up, they swelled, dominating the mirror. Soon, they were so close they flooded my cab with cold white light, erasing the details of the road behind me, washing out my dashboard glow. The van was riding my bumper with an inch of clearance. A cold sweat broke out on my back. This was no sleepy driver. This was predation. Then it pulled into the left lane, pacing me. I refused to look, keeping my gaze locked forward. In my peripheral vision, I saw the passenger window roll down halfway. The interior was dark. I could make out the silhouette of a figure, a baseball cap pulled low. No features. A shadow with intent. A hand emerged. It didn't wave. It gestured sharp, impatient, downward chops of the hand, roll down your window. Then the finger pointed, stabbed repeatedly, toward the bed of my truck. My mind, seeking any anchor in the rising tide of panic, latched onto the possibility. The fuel pump. Had the securing strap failed? Was it about to tumble out onto the highway at 75 miles per hour? Liability, cost, job termination all flashed through my mind. I glanced quickly at my right side mirror, angled to see the bed. It was empty. The reality hit me like a physical blow. I'd delivered the Davenport pump. I was heading to Moline empty, to pick up a new load. The bed was a bare, silver-ribbed cavity. There was nothing to point at. The pointing was a script. A classic, ham-fisted lure. Hey buddy, something's wrong with your vehicle. Pull over so I can help you. It's the oldest trick in the book, but in the dark, on a lonely road, with your nerves already frayed, it finds purchase. They were counting on a moment of confused concern to override my fear. I looked straight ahead, my jaw clenched. I gave a single, firm shake of my head. The reaction was immediate. The van dropped back, then surged ahead, cutting sharply in front of me before veering onto the shoulder and coming to a complete, dead stop. A classic brake check, but more aggressive. An attempt to force a reaction, a confrontation. I didn't slow. I swerved into the left lane and stomped the accelerator, watching the frozen bulk of the van shrink in my mirror. It didn't stay there. Within 30 seconds, it was back in my mirrors, those twin lights once again filling my world. For the next 20 miles, it conducted a symphony of terror. It would fall back until it was just a distant speck, letting the false hope of escape bloom in my chest. Then, without warning, it would rocket forward, closing the gap in seconds, resuming its position as my malevolent shadow. It was a game of psychological torture, demonstrating its power over my pace, my space, my sense of safety. I was a wire pulled taut, vibrating with sheer dread. I needed to break the pattern. I needed witnesses, light, noise. The next exit promised a truck stop. The Iowa 80 wasn't just a stop, it was a small city of light and diesel. I parked my truck directly under the blazing canopy of the fuel island, surrounded by the hulking, comforting forms of Peterbilts and Kenworths, their engines rumbling like sleeping dragons. I didn't see the van enter. I just ran, my legs shaky, into the clanging warmth of the attached diner. The waitress's name was Darlene. I didn't have to say much. My face, pale and sweat-sheened, my darting eyes, said it all. "There's a van," I choked out. "It's been following me. I think they want me to pull over." Darlene didn't hesitate. She didn't offer platitudes. She turned and bellowed into the diner, "Gus. We got a situation." Gus was a force of nature contained in a flannel shirt and a pair of worn Carhartt pants. He had a beard like a thicket of steel wool and eyes that had seen a million miles of bad road. He listened to my broken explanation for about 3 seconds, then held up a hand, silencing me. "Show me," he said, his voice a low gravel rumble. We stepped back into the frozen night. And there it was. The white van. It was idling at the very edge of the lot, where the pavement met the soybean field, 50 yards away. Its headlights were off, but its parking lights glowed a dim amber. It was pointed directly at my truck under the lights. "Yeah," Gus grunted. "That ain't good." He pointed a thick finger at my chest. You. Inside. Now. Then he turned and began walking. Not a hurried walk. A deliberate, unstoppable march. He moved like a glacier, radiating an absolute, territorial authority. He owned this lot, this night, this situation. From the diner window, I watched, my breath fogging the glass. Gus walked right up to the driver's window, stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to be a threat, far enough to react. He stood, arms crossed, and said something. I couldn't hear it. For a long moment, nothing. The van sat, a silent white monolith. Gus didn't move. Then, the van's white reverse lights flared. It shot backward, tires scrabbling for purchase on the icy asphalt, executed a frantic, three-point turn, and vanished down the service road, its tail lights swallowed by the night. Gus came back in, stamping snow from his boots. He accepted the mug of coffee Darlene wordlessly slid to him. Two of 'em, he said, blowing on the steam. Hoodies up. Didn't see faces. Just, staring. Straight ahead. Like dolls. He took a sip, his eyes meeting mine over the rim. Didn't say a word. Not one goddamn word. I stayed for an hour, nursing my own coffee, letting the normalcy of the diner, the clatter of plates, the rumble of trucker conversation seep back into my bones. When I finally summoned the courage to leave, Gus walked me out. Check your rig, he said simply. I did. And there, on the cold, frost-rimed steel of my tailgate, were two perfect handprints. They were smudged, as if someone wearing grimy gloves had braced themselves against it, pushing, testing the latch. The fingers were splayed wide. They hadn't been there when I parked. The story should end there. A close call, a lesson learned. But it doesn't. Because a year later, I ran into an old friend from high school, Ben, who joined the state patrol. Over beers, I told him the story, more as a weird anecdote than anything. He grew very still. White G20. No markings. The silent treatment, he asked. When I nodded, he rubbed his face. Jake, you brushed up against something. We've got bulletins on that MO. It's part of a pattern. He couldn't share much, but he shared enough. The sleeper and shadows theory. The vulnerable, often cognitively impaired individuals used as unsettling first contact, the distraction. The coordinated team in the van, ready to move once the target was isolated and frightened. They weren't after wallets. They were hunting for vehicles for chop shops, or for people to be used in ways the bulletins only hinted at, with phrases like human trafficking indicators and organized theft ring. And then he told me the detail that fused my story with 100 others, that turned an isolated scare into a fragment of a hidden map. We found a van matching that description abandoned in a quarry near the Illinois River last spring. Cleaned with bleach. No prints. No VIN. But in the glove box, he took a long drink. Was a single, cheap, foam flip-flop. Like the kind you get at a dollar store. Size small. A woman's flip-flop. In a van used to stalk men on highways. The pieces didn't just fit, they interlocked with a sickening click. The sleeper and the shadows weren't separate nightmares. They were two acts of the same play. The bruise-colored coat in a Kansas summer was the hook. The white van on an Iowa winter night was the net. They worked the same corridors, the same lonely stretches, using fear as their primary tool. Your compliance to stop, to help, to pull over isn't just a mistake. It's the surrender they're waiting for. So now, I drive differently. The loneliness of the road is no longer a companion, it's a condition to be managed. I fuel up at blindingly lit megastations. I keep a charged power bank and a personal locator beacon in my glove box. I have a dashcam that streams to the cloud. And if I feel the drowsiness coming on, I crank the cold air, I sing at the top of my lungs, I pull over at a busy travel plaza and sleep in the cab with the doors locked. Because I know now that the empty stretches between the exits aren't really empty. They're a hunting preserve. And the things that hunt there don't just want what you have. They want you to make the choice that delivers you to them. They're waiting for you to follow the script. My headlights are always on high beam now. Not just to see the road, but to make sure the things in the shadows know that I can see them, too.